This is Harry Dunn. He's a former U.S. Capitol Police officer. On January 6, 2021, he stood in the hallway of the United States Congress while a mob tried to break through the doors. He was punched, shoved. He heard a man in the crowd call him a racial slur. He kept standing. 4 years later, he filed a lawsuit, not against the people who attacked him, against the President of the United States, because the president had just created a $1.776 billion fund, and the people who attacked Harry Dunn could apply for it. To understand what just happened, you need to go back to 2019. That year, an IRS contractor named Charles Littlejohn leaked Donald Trump's private tax returns to journalists. It was illegal. Littlejohn was caught. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. That should have been the end of it. But in January 2026, President Trump, now back in the White House, filed a $10 billion lawsuit. Not against Littlejohn, who was already convicted, against the IRS itself, against his own government, a government he controlled. Legal experts called it immediately, this was unprecedented. A sitting president suing the federal agencies he oversees. The judge reviewing the case was already preparing to dismiss it for the sheer conflict of interest involved. Then on May 19, 2026, something strange happened. Trump dropped the lawsuit. He didn't need a settlement. He didn't need money. Under the agreement, Trump, his sons Donald Jr. and Eric, and the Trump Organization would receive no monetary payment at all. What they received instead was a formal apology from the United States government and a fund, a $1.776 billion fund. The number wasn't an accident. 1776, the year of American independence. The DOJ press release made sure you noticed. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who until recently had been Trump's own personal criminal defense attorney, announced the creation of the Anti-Weaponization Fund. Its stated purpose to compensate Americans who believed they had been unfairly targeted by the government. The machinery of government, Blanche said, should never be weaponized against any American. That is not a controversial principle. What happened next is where things get complicated, nearly $1.8 billion in taxpayer money. That's where we need to pause, because the source of this money matters enormously. The fund draws from something called the Judgment Fund, a permanent Treasury appropriation that Congress set up specifically for the government to pay legal claims filed against it. Courts award damages, the government pays them from the Judgment Fund. It is, in other words, money already allocated by Congress, money that belongs to the American people. And legal experts were quick to point out that this wasn't what the Judgment Fund was designed for. The Judgment Fund is for lawsuits, said one constitutional law scholar quoted by PBS. It's not for an amorphous group of people who feel like they've been wronged generally by a prior administration. There was another layer that made this unusual. Trump sued the government he controls. He then settled with himself. And the settlement directed nearly $2 billion of public money not to Trump, but to a fund he would indirectly shape. A former DOJ prosecutor named Brendan Ballou, who had handled January 6th cases, said it plainly on NPR. Donald Trump was functionally on both sides of the case. He called it potentially the most corrupt act of presidential power in American history. That's a significant claim. Let's examine whether it holds up. The Anti-Weaponization Fund will be administered by a 5-member commission. 4 of those 5 commissioners will be appointed by the Attorney General. The Attorney General is Todd Blanche. Todd Blanche is Trump's former personal defense lawyer. The 5th commissioner will be selected in consultation with congressional leadership. Trump can remove any of them. The commission will have the power to issue formal apologies on behalf of the United States government. It will have the power to issue monetary relief to claimants, and those decisions, unlike court judgments, will not be subject to judicial review. There will be no judge, no jury, no public evidentiary hearing. A 5-member panel chosen by the Attorney General will decide in private who gets paid and how much. The fund stops processing claims on December 15, 2028, just over a month before the next presidential inauguration. The Crew watchdog organization, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, said the fund quite likely violates the Constitution's domestic emoluments clause. Richard Briffault, a law professor quoted by CBS News, put the problem simply: without public guidelines, it's just kind of an open-ended slush fund. It's possible some of them might have legitimate claims, he said, but there doesn't seem to be any requirement that they persuade a judge. It's not quite clear. So who can apply? The fund is open to a broad range of Trump allies, far broader than most headlines suggested. Potential claimants could include people investigated during Robert Mueller's probe into Russian interference in the 2016 election, Trump administration officials caught up in the Ukraine impeachment of 2019, anyone who believes they were targeted during Biden's presidency, and, this is the part that stopped people cold, anyone who was charged in connection with January 6, 2021. That includes more than 1,500 people convicted of assault, people who attacked police officers with flagpoles, fire extinguishers, and their bare hands. When CNN asked Acting Attorney General Blanche whether those people could receive money from the fund, his answer was direct. Anybody can apply. The same question was put to Vice President J.D. Vance on television. He didn't rule it out. Trump himself was asked why American taxpayers should pay for the January 6thers. He didn't hesitate. This is reimbursing people that were horribly treated, he said. Their lives have been destroyed and they turned out to be right. The applications started coming in almost immediately, even before the commission had been formed, even before there were any formal guidelines for submission. NBC News reported that the Justice Department was already receiving them. On the morning of May 21, 2026, 2 police officers walked into federal court in Washington, D.C. Their names were Harry Dunn and Daniel Hodges. Harry Dunn served as a Capitol Police officer for years. On January 6th, he was in the building. He went public with what happened to him. He testified before Congress. He is currently running for a seat in the House of Representatives from Maryland. Daniel Hodges is a Metropolitan Police officer, still active. In footage from that day, he was seen being crushed in a doorway by the crowd pressing against the Capitol. He continued to serve. Their lawsuit named 3 defendants: President Donald Trump, Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The complaint did not mince words. In the most brazen act of presidential corruption this century, President Donald J. Trump has created a $1.776 billion taxpayer-funded slush fund to finance the insurrectionists and paramilitary groups that commit violence in his name. The suit argued that no federal statute authorizes the creation of this fund, that the settlement on which it is premised is a corrupt sham, and that its design violates the Constitution and federal law. One of the attorneys representing the 2 officers was Brendan Ballou, the same former DOJ prosecutor who had spent years building January 6th cases. Now he was back, on the same side. The Trump slush fund, he told NPR, is potentially the most corrupt act of presidential power in American history. More than 100 police officers were injured on January 6, 2021. Their attackers were pardoned earlier in Trump's second term, one of the broadest acts of presidential clemency in modern history. Now those same individuals could potentially receive financial compensation from the public treasury. Whether they will remains to be seen. The fund's rules are not yet written. The commission has not yet been formed, but the door is open. Let's talk about the number again. $1.776 billion. The DOJ described it as a nod to 1776, the year of America's founding. There was a press release. There were talking points. This is not accidental. Every element of this fund, its name, its amount, its framing, is designed as a political
message. The word weaponization has a specific meaning in the current political environment. Trump spent years arguing that the Justice Department under Biden had been deployed against him personally, that his prosecutions were not legal proceedings but political attacks. Many of his supporters accepted this framing completely. Whether or not you believe that, the creation of this fund is something new. A sitting president converting a personal legal dispute into a government compensation program, drawing from public money, administered by people he controls, benefiting people he defines as victims. Congressional Democrats called it a slush fund immediately. 93 House Democrats filed a brief in court calling the settlement collusive and the fund plainly unlawful. Senator Jamie Raskin of Maryland called it a racket designed to take $1.7 billion of taxpayer dollars out of the Treasury. That framing the president as both plaintiff and judge is the constitutional challenge at the heart of the officer's lawsuit. A president suing the government is unusual enough. A president settling with himself, directing public funds to his own allies, shielded from court oversight, that is something legal scholars say they have not seen before. In the debate over legality and constitutionality, something simpler risks being overlooked. On January 6, 2021, Officer Daniel Hodges was crushed in a doorway. Officer Harry Dunn stood his ground while the crowd shouted slurs at him. More than 100 of their colleagues were injured. 4 people died that day. Others died by suicide in the months that followed. The people who did that were prosecuted. Over 1,600 charges. Convictions for seditious conspiracy. Convictions for assaulting officers. Sentences handed down by federal judges after trials and plea hearings. Those convictions were pardoned. Now a fund exists that those same individuals can apply to for compensation. And the officers who were there that day.